Hello, I'm Bob the Booker, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Boulder by Eva Baltasar as part of my sort of set of reviews looking at the International Booker Longlist this year. And just as sort of a heads up, there will be a portion that will be a bit more on the spoiler side. The majority of this video hopefully should be relatively spoiler free and kind of contained to whatever is either on the blurb or on Goodreads or whatever, and sort of won't go into too much detail. So more about what I feel about the book and all that kind of jazz. But long story short, I loved it. And sort of this book, so translated by Julia Sanches, is another one of the firsts for this year's International Booker, where it's the first book originally written in Catalan to make it onto the long list, which is exciting, and I think is also sort of testament to the fact that not only have there been so many incredible writers writing in Catalan for a while, but also so many more of those books are getting the recognition they deserve. I think particularly for an English-speaking audience, there have been lots of books that haven't been translated for a very long time, and so it's really quite refreshing to see so many presses like And Other Stories who published this in the UK, but also ones like Three Times Rebel, Fum de Stampa, and Charco Press, who are really championing both sort of literature from Spain and Latin America as well, which I think has just been really incredible to see. Anyway, that's all a long, lengthy preamble. Let's get started with the book itself. And so, yeah, long story short, I loved this book. I do have a slight tendency, sort of a preference sometimes for quite short books. I'm really in awe of books that can kind of get in, deliver their key message or what they're trying to do, and then get out again. I think that takes real skill. Looking at books like Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan last year, and so many other incredible books, I think can do it really well. And I think Boulder is a great example of that. I think it moves through the story with great economy. There are often lots of pauses and silences where I think we as the audience fill in gaps about what we think is happening, and sometimes we're right and sometimes we're quite wrong. But anyway, all of that preamble aside, the key story of Boulder is that we have this woman, Boulder, as she's nicknamed, and she is with her partner Samsa, her girlfriend, and who they have this quite bizarre relationship at times. But essentially the core idea behind who they are in a relationship is that Boulder is somewhat passive, or kind of almost sort of taken by the wind a little bit. People say, hey, maybe we should do this thing, and she might do it, or she might have a strong opinion, but she never really acts on it. And so she is this character who sort of floats through bits of life, and in some ways that is represented by what happens to some degree with their relationship. So Samsa is from Iceland, and so Boulder at one point moves from Spain to go and live with her, and she's also kind of at various points also a cook on a ship and all these other things. So her life is sort of a bit, she's at that stage where she's not fully sure of what she wants to do, and life is sort of taking her along. And parts of that start to change when Samsa asks if she might want to have a child with her. And that's where a key part of this book turns and sort of is a core description of part of that book. But I find Boulder as a character really interesting because she's at turns quite frustrating, because she's not particularly taking a lot of action, and even little things like there's a Latin American woman who she meets at one point and in Iceland, and there's this sort of suggestion that they're going to be friends because finally they both have somebody they can speak to in Spanish to each other. But Boulder quickly gets bored of this idea because she sort of is almost frustrated that she's going to have to be forced to talk to somebody in Spanish just because they can speak in Spanish to each other. And so there are all these little moments like that where she sort of is carried through life a little bit. And it's really hard to talk about the rest of this book without talking about the core part of this. I think this is a really fantastic little book. I think it's really clever in its economy, because I think it makes a really important set of points, and then it very quickly gets out. And I think it's almost more startling because of that. I think if this had been 100 pages longer, I mean, this book is around 100 pages, but if it had been, a 200-page novel, even, or 300 or whatever, I think we would have lost some of the power of this, because we almost need it to be short, because she's so passive. We kind of almost don't want pages and pages of her being passive. It's almost like somebody around her makes a decision, she goes with it, and that's what's happening. And so because she's almost a bit of a tourist in other people's lives, it almost makes sense that this book's short, because what is she contributing? We're hearing things largely through her, but what is she contributing at various points? And that's where I think this book is really interesting, because when it comes to wider discussions around this child, that is where we suddenly start to see a little bit more about who Boulder actually is. And with that, let's go on to talking about spoilers. So feel free to drop off if you have to, and we'll talk about those here. So a core part of this conversation is us thinking about this child. I say us, but Boulder and Samsa talking about this child. And it sort of suddenly, I think, we see a lot in real life, but also in TV shows and films and books, a child is not a thing that will fix a broken relationship, despite many people trying. And so what we see is that Boulder initially starts to sort of go along with it, being like, yeah, I mean, I guess we could maybe have a child. I don't really know how to say to you that I don't want this, but okay. And then suddenly it's almost too late, and the child is on its way and everything's happening. And we start to see this really interesting character development for Boulder, because she starts to become quite jealous in various ways, or envious of other people in a really interesting way. So she suddenly starts to notice that Samsa is sort of growing into herself a little bit more, but also suddenly has these needs that Boulder doesn't feel like she's able to support her with. Boulder is also starting to feel that her own emotions are being sidelined, or that she is even less important. She's even more of a tourist in other people's lives when this comes along, because she's now just an additional parent, and it wasn't really her decision, and she never really she did have a chance to say no, but that chance was never really taken. And so this sort of expands outwards, and she suddenly starts to wonder what she's doing a little bit with her life. In the meantime, she also starts to become quite jealous of the nanny, who is looking after the little baby. And she starts to, as a result, suspect that a couple of things are happening. Firstly, that the nanny is going to sort of steal this child away from her almost, because the child will love her more than she will Boulder. She also starts to worry that Samsa is going to become so reliant on this nanny that she won't need Boulder. And all of these things start to sort of fall into place for Boulder, where she's convinced that everything is wrong and horrible. And in this, Boulder starts considering whether she wants to have an affair. And she gets very close on several occasions, but does seem to sort of just about hold herself back mostly. She meets this woman at she basically at one point is selling coffee. She meets this woman who she's really fascinated by, because she seems so carefree and exciting and dynamic in so many ways. But she holds herself back at first, worrying that, she can't do this to Samsa. And increasingly she gets closer and closer to this all happening. In the meantime, she starts to think, I feel awful about what I've done. And the book ends with her coming home and seeing Samsa and the nanny having this affair, that in some ways the worst outcome in her mind, the thing she's been worried about having been the case all along. And it's there, and it's true. And so Boulder is sort of vindicated that she's been right, but also this is not what she wanted. But it also in some ways frees her up, because if Samsa is having this affair, well, then can Boulder, but Boulder's already held herself back and not done it. So has her ship sailed? And, all of these conversations start to happen almost off the page, I think. And that's, again, where I think this book's economy is really interesting, because it's able to do that, because it steps back so much. So I think Boulder is really exciting for that, because of what it offers as a potential within this, and particularly one of the sort of final scenes with this nanny and Samsa having this affair is there is a third part to this, to this, you know, this affair, which is that, you know, Samsa and the nanny are having sex, but the baby is still breastfeeding. And so we have this thing that in many ways, Boulder is in no place a part of this, right? She cannot be the sexual partner to Samsa, in this scenario. She cannot be the mother to the child. She's sort of completely excluded from any potential opportunity here. And I also did wonder, I don't know if I'm reading way too much into this, but part of me was also really intrigued by Samsa as a name, because for me, as somebody who loves Kafka, it reminds me of Gregor Samsa, the man who wakes up as this sort of beast, creature, insect, cockroach thing. And part of me wonders if there's a sort of a line being drawn here as well, in terms of Samsa being the person having this kid. She is at times bedbound, or kind of, she has to stay away from the rest of the world, just like Gregor Samsa, in her bed, because she is pregnant and is, you know, getting ready for this baby to arrive. But then, almost unlike Gregor Samsa, who sort of repulses everybody around him in this family, she in fact almost has all of the attention and love come towards her. And Boulder is almost the weird insect creature who can't connect with anybody. And so I don't know if there's something really clever going on there, or if I'm massively overreaching here and reading into things that aren't really there. But anyway, I like to think that's part of the reading of it, in my mind, if nowhere else. But yeah, I just think it's a really clever and really interesting book. And I think some of these scenes were so startling for their vividness, that we've got, you know, this really striking sexual scene towards the end. We've got these really striking scenes of this woman in this coffee shop and the way that these two women interact. We've got these sort of, what she at first thinks are sort of potentially paranoid delusions about cheating, which then turn out to be true. And I think there are so many moments that are really poignant and powerful and punchy in this book, and that was an unintentional bit of alliteration. And all of that is happening in 80, 90 pages, something like that. And so, yeah, I think it's really quite impressive. And I'm really keen now to go and read Permafrost, which is the book before this. And they're meant to form a bit of a triptych. I think that, I don't know if the third one's out, but either way, I'm really excited by this. And I love this kind of vivid, almost brutal, punchy kind of way of telling a story. Yeah, and I'm just very, very excited by this book. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker, talking about this book. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, if as much as possible, try to keep the any spoilers out of the chat, just in case people haven't read it yet. But yeah, really, really excited to talk more about this book. And this is kind of one I'm gunning for to be on the shortlist. This is sort of in my dream shortlist so far. This is one of the ones I'd love to see there, because I just think it's a brilliant little book. I've been Bob. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.